not follow the other side, come. Hi. You look beautiful today. Too. You saw the dress? Yes, I did. It's beautiful. Good morning, Your Excellencies. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Before we commence our proceedings for today, I'd like to run and give a brief recap of discussions yesterday. But one key thing that was pointed out yesterday was that the opening ceremony established a shared sense of urgency and moral imperative to reconstruct governance in the Sahel around the principles of trust, justice, and dignity. We will all agree that the speakers collectively emphasized that while geopolitical tensions and institutional backsliding pose real threats, the Sahel's transformation lies in its resilience. It lies in the resilience of its people and the political will to embrace citizen-driven reform, youth inclusion, and visionary leadership. And if we go and give specific details as to who said what, recall that the President of the Republic of Gambia, His Excellency Adama Barrow, called for deeper investment in inclusive and participatory governance systems to address our complex challenges in the region. He also reaffirmed his government's commitment to people-centered reform and urged all of us here to inspire innovative partnerships that can shape resilient institutions and shared prosperity. President Jonathan also challenged us to move beyond the rhetorics to practical wealth-creating solutions for the Sahel. Madam Ahuna declared that the crisis in the Sahel is not just about fragility. That's the conversation when you talk about the Sahel. Everybody says, oh, it is fractured, it is fragile, it is volatile. But she said that it is a failure to invest in governance as a force for justice and prosperity. Again, the word justice. She also called for a paradigm shift from managing instability to building legitimacy, and from perceiving citizens as risk to empowering them as solution bearers. I could go on and on and on, but like I said, the key messaging is that we would have to develop very innovative and practical solutions to address the challenges that we face in the Sahel. It's a powerful call for all of us seated here today to just go, it's not just symbolic, but to serve that this forum is not just symbolic, but that it serves as a launch pad for a new governance compact that will define the future of the Sahel. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I would like to dive straight to the first panel of today. We have heard that one of the key takeaways had to do with visionary leadership. Today, we will be talking about the first panel for today will be the art of leadership. And this will be a conversation with the former President of the Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, and will be moderated by the Assistant Secretary General of UNDP, Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa, Madam Ahuna Eziokonwa. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please give Madam a warm welcome to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Friends, I hope you're all sufficiently stimulated after yesterday. It was really a powerful co-creation of intellectual insights, but also a hearty recognition of needs in this region, needs in the world, and the fact that together there's actually the possibility of making change happen. So it was an optimistic day, even as we registered the challenges. Today, we're going to have a conversation on, I think, one of the core elements of governance, which is leadership. Mr. President, I think we're very honored to have you in our midst. You know, one thing that happens when you become a president, there's a huge distance between you and people because you are very much protected. People don't have any kind of insight. They don't have the inside look in your room. When you become former president, it really becomes possible to get some insights on what it means to be on that seat. And I want to thank you for making yourself available. It's important that we understand because often we have a lot of guesswork about what leaders are going through, about what drives them, about, why, how, what. So today we have an exciting hour together with this Mr. President to get into some of these nitty-gritties of leadership. And I'm going to, can you hear me on this one? Is it okay? So I'm going to kick it off with a question that's been on my mind about you, Mr. President. That question is about what's in a name. Good luck. You know, I'm very big on names, and I don't know why your parents named you Good Luck, but it seems to me your name has kind of been fundamental in your trajectory. If I'm not mistaken, you were deputy governor of your state, and something happened to the governor and you became governor. And then you were vice president, something happened to the president and you became president. Is that good luck? Or is there something else going on there, Mr. President?
Thank you so much for starting with this angle. Of course, my trajectory into politics, by the time I became the president of Nigeria, there were so many good luck babies across the country. So many women named their children Good Luck because they will want them to have the kind of luck I have. Well, if you talk about the relevance of a name, as a Christian, I know that names are significant. Because if you go through the scriptures, if a child is born and God wants that child to do a particular thing, sometimes direct the parents to rename the child, call him this, call him that. That means that there's something. Even philosophically, even traditionally, we give children good names in terms of wishing them well, hoping that they will live by the name. But in reality, it doesn't go that way. From my village alone, small community alone, we had up to, as we were growing up, we were about 3 good lucks or lucky and things like that. But it's only my own that manifests. So bearing the name Good Luck alone may not necessarily. You must also have to do certain things to make sure that what your parents expect from you materializes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the luck did not start to manifest immediately because you've often said that you grew up without shoes, without bags, to go to school. You trekked, as we say in Nigeria, many miles to get to school. You studied under lanterns. There was no electricity. And this child without shoes rises to become the leader of the largest country on the African continent. What do you think those days, those early days of being without, how do you think that shaped then the quality of leadership that you delivered? Did it make you more compassionate? Was there a link? Just sort of walk us through a little bit how living under those conditions, that being your formative years, your beginnings, quite poor, and then rising to that level when you then land at your desk on day one as president of Nigeria, did your upbringing have shape how you delivered as president?
Definitely it does. Because when you pass through my kind of life history, trajectory, from nothing to the top, that's supposed to humble you. So if you see the next child or the next person, even if that person is still low, you should know that if you are able to get up from that level to the peak, that child too can get to the peak. That really helps you in terms of your relationship with people. A number of people say, but President, you're a very humble person. I must be humbled because I was not born with silver spoon in the mouth. I grew from the gutter, kind of, in a rural setting. So it was by divine providence that Nigerians voted for me and become their president. So that humbles you. And that makes you to have that patience to listen to people, try to diagnose issues properly before taking decisions. And you compare that to probably people that were born with silver spoons in the mouth. Some people think that we are specially created to come and oversee human beings. If I see how some president and even some national government heads, like in Nigeria, we talk about our state. In some other countries, you have the provinces, the regions. Even if you have an idea about what happens in the executive council meeting, it's a monologue. The person at the head alone talks, and after announcing, you leave. The commissioners or ministers virtually have no input. One of my governors, who was my minister, is here. As a president then, any issue that comes up on the floor of the Executive Council, I expected everybody to interrogate that issue very clearly. There are issues that I even have taken a decision because sometimes a memo is getting late for certain things. The president can give anticipatory approval so that the works can go on, but it will still come to ESCO. Ordinarily, if executive president approves a memo, there's nothing you can do again. But then it must still come to council for ratification. And sometimes when you see some of my ministers tearing that memo, you'll be surprised. That's it. It's allowed so that the minister that brought that memo should know that there were some issues that were not properly done, so that subsequently you will do it properly. Bringing from the scratch helps to guide my pathway and help the way I relate with people.
So please, let's avoid presidents with silver spoon and go for those who have the deep experience of the majority of the people. But I'm sure that that's not the only thing that makes you deliver from a compassionate and accountable perspective. There's also character and all of that. And we'll get a little bit to that in a second. So, Mr. President, we in UNDP, we support elections, right? We are there all the time to support elections to be fair, free, and stable. And I have to say, as a UN official who's been in these countries when elections are being held, the biggest issue is not elections. It's accepting the result of the elections. And there we sort of brace ourselves for conflict, for violence, because culturally, in a lot of these elections, it seems acceptance is a real issue. And then, as a result, we have a lot of instability. Electoral violence on the continent is quite pervasive. You stood out when you conceded an election even before the results. And I think the world was watching because we know that Nigeria is very vulnerable to violence because it's a multi-ethnic society as well, and sometimes elections can go that route. So any little spark could sort of lead to huge violence. I'm going to concede, despite the fact that I'm sure there were constituencies, because as a leader, you're not standing alone. You are representing a party and a lot of interest. So I can imagine that there was a lot of pressure. But regardless, you stepped out and you conceded. And disappointing, I'm sure, a lot of people who wanted to see it otherwise. So what led you to that moment? What was in your mind? What were you thinking?
Thank you so much. Well, like you mentioned, to take certain decisions as a leader, as a president, it's difficult because you are taking a decision that will affect so many people. But still, you must be in a position to take hard decisions, even if it will cost your life in some cases. If you know that
is this mic working?
Okay, give me this.
Maybe this one.
Very complicated issues because the decisions you take don't affect only you, but affect so many people. And a complex country like Nigeria, where ethnicity is always there, religion is always there. When you are taking certain decisions, especially politically related, it affects the people that works with you. It affects your ethnic group. It affects people who have the same faith with you. So there are so many things. But even at that, a president must take very hard decisions as long as you are convinced that that is in the best interest of the people, even if that decision will cost you personally. When you mentioned the issue of the elections, I think I gave you a copy of my book in Ghana. If you read a section of it, I mentioned what was going through my mind those last hours leading to the elections, and for me to concede defeat and call late General Buhari to congratulate him even before the election was formally announced. One thing can guide anybody to take such decisions. First and foremost is the motive that takes you to politics. Why did you get into politics? On the average, I can say probably more people get into politics because they want to make money. If that is your driving motive for going to the politics, then you wouldn't want to leave the office. You prefer to die there in the office. But if that is not the reason, you want to serve the people, and you notice that things have changed, and if you don't take certain decisions, it will affect the very people that you want to serve. In Nigeria then, I knew as a president that the country was very tense, and it could have led to killings and destruction of private properties. And when I look at the whole scenario, I felt that no, it's not about being the president of Nigeria. In line with my slogan during the campaigns, that my political ambition to be the president of Nigeria is not worth the blood of any Nigerian. So I had to take that decision to make sure that we protect people's assets. Because we worked hard for that 5 years I was the president of Nigeria. We encouraged local and foreign investments in the country. And I cannot sit down and watch people vandalizing and destroying people's investment in the name of political conflicts, like we see what is happening in South Sudan, what is happening in Sudan and other countries. These countries have been degraded because of leadership struggle. And I feel Nigeria should not pass through that trajectory as a nation. So it was easy for me to take that decision. It was not too pleasing to everybody. And of course, people who worked with me suffered because of that decision. But still, I'm happy today that I took that decision to save the life of people, to protect the investment of Nigerians. And I think Nigerians even appreciate me more now than when I was in office. So what is the issue of being a president for? Anybody can be a president. But when you become a president, what did you leave behind? What will people remember you for? That is fundamental. Thank you.
Which is important, but the key word, how leaders in Africa in particular, where there is a bit of a worship culture, you find that once you get to a certain position, people around you literally worship you. And they create this sense of a God. Leaders are actually made by the people. And unfortunately, in the context of Africa, we revere this position, perhaps to the extreme. How does that make you feel when you exist playing God? How does that make you feel? How do you retain God? How does that make you feel? How do you retain some form?
This earns money and it thinks it's enough. So they will expect to get more. You think that they are so rich, they are stupendously rich, but to them, they want more. And to me, one key thing about what I notice is there's a slight difference between corruption to make money. A slight difference between corruption to make money and greed. The greatest problem we have in most of our countries is greed by leaders. Not necessarily heads of state alone, even those who have the opportunity to head departments of government. It's greed that can make somebody steal money that you will not spend. That is beyond corruption. If you read this book written by one British journalist, Richard Dowden, published in 2008, read the section on Nigeria. It talks about corruption in Nigeria, and I totally agree with him. So, yes, he talks about heads of state. Yes, he talks about leaders now becoming like little gods, deities. Some people like to be worshipped, and maybe that is one of the things that makes me completely different. I hate it. I don't like it at all. In fact, those who have worked with me when I was in office, from the state to the center, and even those who are still working with me, they will know my ways of life. My executive director is here, and my medium aide is also here. I hate a situation where this hero worship, where people begin to worship leaders as if you are not a human being again. And that one gets into the mind of leaders, and they begin to play the role of God on earth. Maybe the kings can play that role because they are. Maybe the kings can play that role because they are. But to me, I'm a mere mortal. I hate it. And so that's fundamental.
So How would you, I mean, as someone who's been on the other side, and obviously the relationship between the people and the leaders, and sometimes the leaders reinforce, the people reinforcing this sense of, I am God. If you are speaking to citizens, electorate actually mismanage leadership, what is the responsibility?
To government to be able to feed themselves, take care of their families. Then citizens can be independent-minded. But where you have societies where everybody will go to people in government to get favor before you can take care of yourself and your family, of course, you fall into the hero worship, because some of them want that. And if you don't, of course, you will not be accommodated. So you have to do. And sometimes it becomes the culture of the people. There is this, somebody told me a funny thing, though it has nothing to do with political leadership. A man in Nigeria, we know we love titles. Chief this, Alaji that. And somebody wanted to see a man that was a chief for something. I got to the house, knocked, the wife came and opened the house, and the man said, I want to see, let's say Jonathan, I want to see Mr. Jonathan. Then the wife just shouted at the man, there's no Mr. Jonathan in this house, and banged the door. Because the man did not say Chief Jonathan. So this is in us, not just political leaders, even the ordinary people. And that is why probably some of our cultures, we have these praise singers that sing praises to dignitaries and you give them money. It's very common, especially in the southwestern part of Nigeria. So it becomes a part of the system. For us to get out of that, we must develop our economies that people will not need to know the face of a commissioner, to know who is the minister, not to talk about a president. So get whatever he wants to get from society.
Coming to that point, because one of the puzzles that a lot of people feel about Africa is a very rich continent in natural resources, being home to some of the poorest people in the world. And, this disconnect between Africa's potential and the opportunity or lack of opportunity for its people, a lot of people tend to ascribe that to corruption. Something you've described as pure stealing. So don't, kind of use corruption as some kind of abstract term. We're talking about people stealing what doesn't belong to them. But maybe let's come to a moment that is a little bit personal here in terms of your confrontation of this issue. Because we also know not all leaders in Africa are accumulating wealth or are there to accumulate wealth. Some have been able to use their leadership influence to fight corruption more successfully than others. In a country like Nigeria, obviously with the complex layers, it's a federal system. You have state-level corruption as well, and you have local-level corruption. In your moments of frustration, because, at the time you took office, Nigeria was declared the largest economy in Africa. That means something. But at the same time, multidimensional poverty in Nigeria was greater than anywhere else in Africa. And then, so you're looking at this situation, how did you rein in on those habits and tendencies that robbed millions of Nigerians, hard-working people, by the way, of the opportunity to prosper? What was your biggest challenge in trying to address the issue in a country like Nigeria? How did you, because, the top might not, the person leading might not be correct, but you have a whole machinery where the stealing is cascading. But is there a role for the man at the top or the woman at the top to put a brake on this? How did you do it, or try to do it,
What did you confront? Is it possible? Is the question. And you're speaking to leaders now. Let's say you're, presidents who have just come into office are listening to you. They are facing similar situations. What steps do you think, in hindsight, as you reflect on maybe some of the things you succeeded on and some of the things that you failed on, in hindsight, what is the secret of addressing this issue on the African continent?
Thank you. Of course, you raised the issue of maybe for our GDP then and the level of poverty. Of course, the issue of corruption. Even when I was in office, there were some scandals about corruption, which maybe trying to be diplomatic. You don't want to ask me directly. I would have loved that you asked me directly so I can give you some perspective. But a number of issues. First and foremost, yes, Africa is a rich continent. We'll say potentially rich. But your wealth, not to talk about the mineral, that's more technical. Not to talk about the mineral, that's more technical. So for us to really say Africa is a rich country, we must be in position to exploit our resources. We must be able to add value to our resources and export the finished produce. Otherwise, you export raw materials and create jobs for others, and then we go to those countries to struggle for jobs, and they treat us anyhow they like. So I don't see Africa as a rich country because we've not been able to convert what we have in our natural environment to means of exchange. And so, yes.
President, in the case of Nigeria, and what were the issues?
Yes. I'm coming. For example, yesterday, when I spoke, mentioned briefly that first and foremost, there are two levels of poverty. The multidimensional poverty, that will say that people are extremely poor. These are most cases peasants, people who have no skills, probably not even educated. And for you to make sure that people get out of that level, you must look at what dominates the local economies in the various areas and encourage it. In Nigeria, we're an agrarian society. And that is why we did very well in agriculture. If you interview Akin, the president, ADB president, he will tell you what we did. It was because of what we did in agriculture that made him to even be appointed or elected as the president of the African Development Bank. So that is to make sure that that was form of poverty at that level. Then, of course, the other levels, look, we cannot continue. Nigeria, we are known for crude oil. We export crude oil, then we import petroleum products. This is not ironical. We export the crude oil. Then we go to other countries to import aviation fuel, we import EMS for our cars, we import kerosene. So we started encouraging that, look, we must have refineries. The government refineries were all broken down. We tried to reactivate them, but it was always a problem. So the only thing is to encourage the private sector. And we started the journey. Now, Dangote, in fact, Nigeria is no longer importing petroleum products. We started that journey. And we didn't do much in the solid mineral sector. Maybe because there were too many, we changed the ministers too frequently. But that was my directive to any of the ministers that I appointed. We cannot continue to export raw materials. Go to Nigeria, go to states like Zamfara State, where the poverty level is quite high. Out of school population is quite high. When I was in office, it was about 70% of children were not going to school. So you can see the level at which people operate. But you have gold. And people from modern nationalities, from what you see, are just using the locals to steal and send it out of the country. So until we are able to exploit our own resources, add value to our own resources, and export finished produce, somehow blown out of proportion. Let me give you an example. To me, when I came into office, 2011, I signed the Freedom of Information Bill into law, passed a law to give journalists and people in civil society free access to get any information you want to get from any department of government. Somebody who wants to be stealing money will not do that. So that if you hear anything, whistleblow anything, you are free to go. And if the government official fail to give you that information, it's a criminal offense. We did that. When we were to celebrate 2010, when we were to celebrate 50 years of our independence, 50 years of Nigerian independence, that's something I did with my cabinet. Probably if my governor here, maybe if he attended the council meeting that day, he will remember. I bought this book written by Richard Dawson called Africa, Altered States, Ordinary Miracles, and talks about all kinds of things across. It's a British journalist that has been covering Africa since 1975. When he talks about Nigeria, life in Lagos, corruption in Nigeria, and so on. I bought that book and distributed to council members. And I also bought this Singaporean man's book, From Third to First, Lee Kuan Yew or so. Yes, I said they should read. Then I asked them to read the section on Nigeria, especially from Richard's book. So I told them that this program, we'll have a conference like this, but we are going to invite that man to be the keynote speaker. And my own ministers say, President, no. That this man that finished us, no, you cannot bring him. I said, the man did not finish us. We must invite him, let him come and speak. Let us know the perception of people about us. Some may be ordinary perception, some may be real. Let us not deceive us. But, well, as executive president, I forced on my ministers. We invited that man.
You made an executive order.
No. Then I also invited one lady, a white lady from South African journalist that wrote a book based in Korean politics. This is our turn to chop. You know this lady, Michelle, yes, Wrong, yes, Michelle Wrong. As one of the panelists, Kenya and Nigeria have some similar attributes in terms of certain things. And my ministers were looking at me. I said, they must come. We must interact with them. And we had the conference. Dawson said that when he got the invitation, he was surprised that probably the president is inviting him so that the president will hurt him because of what he wrote about Nigeria. But that is my mind. So it was totally committed to, you can't eradicate corruption completely, but should be able to reduce it to the level that will not affect society again. At least one country that has done well recently is Rwanda. Kagame is doing quite well in terms of that. I did not succeed to that level. I know during my government there was this scandal, which was more political than, and those who read it. For example, the CBN governor, the head of my treasury, raised an alarm that we lost $49.8 billion between January 2012 and July 2013. That's the period of 1 year, 7 months. When you call $59.8 billion, just call it $50 billion. And it was surprising. And I don't think from the income, the oil incomes, I don't think when the IOCs, the operators remove their own and so on, what the government and cannot be up to that within that space of time. It's a lot of money. Later on, when there was so much talks about it, it changed it to 12 billion. Later, it changed it to 20 billion. So even the figures, though everybody talks about for the 49.8, but the 12 billion later mentioned and 20 billion later mentioned. The Senate has to investigate and using consultants. One of the senators is here, Senator Nengi, and they did not see the money. Government has to use PWD, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to audit. And PricewaterhouseCoopers said that NNPC cannot properly give proper account to about $1.48 billion. They queried that they did not say it was stolen, but in terms of documentation and so on, they couldn't give proper account. But the story is that under Jonathan, the country lost $50 billion. I remember that year when we have a conference between Africa and Europe. EU. So when we went to Brussels, of course, Angela Merkel, then the Chancellor of Germany, asked me for a bilateral. So she invited me. So I have to go there with some of my ministers. Immediately we got in. She did not even allow me to sit down. So President Jonathan, that Nigeria lost $49.8 billion. I just looked at her and said, well, Your Excellency, you know, Germany, your economy is quite strong. So 49.8, just call 50 billion. So your economy is strong. So if you lose $50 billion, you'll not notice it. But in Nigeria, if we lose $50 billion, the federal government, the state governments will not be able to pay salaries. Yes. So she just turned and looked at me and said, well, even in Germany, $50 billion is a lot of money. And ended there. So people will just hear some of these figures. But when you go into it, it is not quite correct. So yes, there is corruption in Africa, there is corruption in Nigeria, no doubt about that.
Yes.
But some of the stories are not absolutely correct.
Yeah. So that said, we're talking in this governance meeting about trust, right? And what is it that makes building trust possible? What is it that allows a social contract between the state and society to happen, even in the midst of all the stories? But I think the biggest story for people is their daily experience. It's what they experience, not necessarily what they read. You know, you come from an oil-producing part of Nigeria, and I happen to have gone to school in that region. And I remember, and this is college, times when we would see the gas flaring in the region. This was at Abraka. And yet we didn't have power to study. This is what I would walk away with. You know, it's like there is extraction happening right here in front of me, but the dividends are not impacting my life. This is the story that people have that create African leaders in negotiating, say, critical minerals, which is in high demand by many parts of the world, vote for their people. Will they negotiate on the basis of the interest of their people, or will there be once again a selling out of the resources of the people? So these are questions that obviously relate to governance, but I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you maybe a final question, and then I will open up to some Q&A. We know that you have established the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation, and you are also part of this mediation force under the elders. Could you share maybe some behind-the-scenes story where your identity as a former president made a difference in a tense mediation situation, and what qualities do African leaders need most to be effective peace builders today? We're looking for jobs for former presidents so that they can actually leave. So if you can sort of give us some insights on life after the presidency, and what you would advise those who are in power and contemplating maybe also conceding, what qualities they would need or what opportunities are there for them to continue to make their legacy.
Thank you. You raised a number of things. I hope I'll be able to cover all of them. Any one that I don't, probably somebody that person can ask. But the key thing is the word trust. Even relating to the activities of a former president, relating to leaders and the citizens of their country. Trust is not something that you can impose or even use the holy books to deceive people. People look at you and look at your family, and you cannot, maybe you have children, president, you've gone to another president and say, please, these pebbles, don't take everything to the right, spread it. The man will look at you and go, look at this hypocrite. He said, I should give you some life examples. I think Moyo is here. When we had some issues in Guinea, when Alpha Conde wanted to amend the constitution after finishing his first, I remember we had a lot of interaction. At a point, Alpha Conde was very angry. I remember we had a lot of interaction. At a point, Alpha Conde was very angry. And you know what he said? He said, for Jonathan, yes, I can understand. But you Soglo, you can't talk to me. That when you're in office, you did this, you did this, you did this. So he remembered certain things that Soglo did. Soglo is much older than us. But he said, you cannot tell me this because you did things worse than this. So, in fact, because of the way a leader lives his life and the circumstances around you can make it easier for you to solve problems. Look at this, the last election in the Gambia here. We came under the platform of the West African Elders Forum. When the results were announced, the country was tense. That night, it was about 11, between 11 and 12 or so. We get the signals that the youths from the opposition have gathered in the house of the opposition leader. And they want to mobilize that night to create havoc in the city of Banjul. So what do? And the security were everywhere. So if these youths move out in that night, they will clash with the security with weapons. Definitely there will be few deaths. We have to move to the person's house. And when we got there, we saw the sea of young, angry people outside the house. But immediately we were walking in that night, and they were talking to them, who is that? So President Jonathan. The hearing that was President Jonathan alone calmed the atmosphere, about 50%. That at least we've gone to listen to them, and this is a man that would surely say the truth to government or whatever. Because we passed through, we had a conversation with the leader until we were able to convince them to disperse the youth. So sometimes the personal reaction, when we went to the Botswana election, Botswana, the ruling party that just lost the election, was there for 58 years. From independence, only one party that was able to rule. And before the election, the president has left. I said, Jonathan, well, you were the president of Nigeria and you left. So if I lost the election, I will leave. So that's what he said. That means that he remembered what I did in Nigeria. So in one way or the other, sometimes people don't say it out. But sometimes just seeing you and remembering what you stand for brings some kind of calmness in them. So definitely, the issue of trust is critical for leaders and even for the interaction with people generally. I don't know what other things you raised. The gas flaring and things like that in Nigeria?
No, that was just like a side comment to buttress the fact that people want to see the impact of good leadership on their lives, on their daily lives, and that's what builds trust. If they see change happening because of leadership, but if they don't, if it doesn't affect their daily lives, it's, no amount of data you give them or conviction will change their minds. I just want to, as we start to conclude this hour, to give, if you allow me, Mr. President, to give the chance to the audience, given what you've heard, any reactions. And I will give a chance to 2 or 3 comebacks here. Do we have a roving mic? Can you please give a mic to the gentleman in front and then over there, and then maybe I'll take one lady over here, yes.
Excellencies, thank you very much, Mr. President. My name is Senator Abdul Ningi, and I'm a senator in the Nigerian parliament. Mr. President, let me most profoundly say I'm so proud of you. Your opening speech has actually made our days here. Mr. President recalled when you were in power, I was in the Senate, and of course, the Deputy Senate Leader. We had majority both in the House of Reps and in the Senate and in the subnationals. That means we had more governors, almost 22 to 21 governors, and almost 473 local governments out of 774 from Nigeria. My question has to do with this scenario of most leaders, particularly in Nigeria, having what you call in the Nigerian parlance, cabal. This cabal are defined as the inner caucus of most head of states or president in Nigeria. And there was this rumor that if the cabal had known you are going to concede to the president, we had this rumor that you would have been drugged so that you will be sleeping for 24 hours. And therefore, there is no way you concede. Secondly, we heard that there was this rumor that they make it almost impossible for you to come out and address the Nigerian nation while conceding. Mr. President, my question is, did you foresee at that material time that there are some interest groups within the presidency and outside the presidency that had that ambition, and therefore you did a fast one on them and quickly concede even before the formal announcement of the official result? That is one angle. The next question has to do with the aftermath.
Please kindly conclude.
I'm concluding. Mr. President, is there anything that still agitates your mind that you would have actually accomplished as a president, that day in, day out, we keep thinking about it? What specific things will you not share with the audience that you wish to accomplish but did not? Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished Senator Nengi. Luckily, we are in government at the same time. You are still there, but I've left. In terms of my concession, there are so many stories about it that were not quite right. In terms of the issue of cabal, I don't know, Nigeria, that word cabal has now come to stay in our political vocabulary. But there is nobody who will hold a very high office, even in the private sector, that don't have some key people around him. No matter how knowledgeable you are, you need people to sometimes give you certain suggestions, sometimes look at something differently. So there's absolutely nothing wrong in a president having some key leaders that he can, because not everybody will easily have access to the president. In one way or the other, he may have some friends, some old colleagues, and so on. The problem we have is that, and that's why we use this name cabal and we put some kind of negative connotation to it, because the advice and their suggestions is to their own benefit. If they are advising a president or a prime minister on general things that will bring benefit to the public, nobody will frown about it. Why should the president have a cabinet of ministers? They are all cabal, because they meet in the executive council to conspire about how they will run the country. But it's just a larger cabal. So, yeah, so presidents have that. I don't really have a cabal by definition. But yes, some elders, some people senior to me who have been in government before me, who have seen it all, from time to time see me to make suggestions. And that is normal for everybody. I remember there was a time I was talking with the first military governor of the old River State, King Dieta Spiv, who was the governor at the age of 24, as a military officer. I said that sometimes when he called some of his commissioners and direct them to do certain things, they will turn at him and say, my son will not do it this way. So you have those kind of who are senior to you that sometimes can help. So there's nothing wrong. And there's no cabal that confused me. That day, I remember vividly that I called General Buhari. Results were coming in. Then I witnessed the incident that happened at the National Election Center when Elder Rubebe, who was representing me, challenged Jiga, the chairman of the National Independent Electoral Commission. And it was very bad, and people say the country would go into crisis. We witnessed all that. So, yeah, some of my aides, some ministers were there with me, some of my aides were there. And people were talking random. I couldn't even talk. I was just listening to people. Everybody is making one suggestion or the other, and so on. I remember Ngozi too was there, the finance minister then. Back to join them, and they were still talking. And I said that, well, gentlemen, no need to talk again. I've congratulated Buhari, it's over. Then Chidoka, I said, President, have you done that? I said, yes. They said, can I tweet it? I said, go on and tweet it. So it was Chidoka that tweeted, and they went viral. So the stories of Kabad pushing left and right, I don't think it was quite correct. There was nothing like that. Then you ask whether there are certain things I would have loved to do, but I couldn't do. Yes, everybody. I was there for 5 years. So definitely you cannot exhaust what you will have loved to do for your country. But I don't need to lament over such issues. The people who have taken over will continue to run the country the way they see Nigeria. Will continue to look at them and make their own suggestions. I don't want to begin to lament over what I would have done differently or whatever. So thank you for that.
Thank you so.
Please keep it short.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Mr. President, former President of Nigeria. And I've actually been personally looking for this opportunity to exchange with you on some of the experiences. Okay. I know that the focus of this conference is about governance, and limiting that to elections would be quite simplistic, which I wouldn't want to do. But just to emphasize the point that when you were in the government, I'm sure as a leader, you immediately concern yourself with policy making, but the implementation lies within the purview of the civil service. And I think when we talk about governance, we need to basically look at how civil service is quite sufficient and efficient enough to undertake certain policies that you've been able to implement. How do you deal with some of the challenges within the civil service to ensure that they're able to take up certain policy initiatives that you initiated during your tenure for implementation?
Thank you. I think yesterday we had the permanent secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here, and he's not here today. Well, sometimes, yes, the civil service, people claim, could affect the performance of government. And no, that, you know why in Nigeria we call it the civil service? The private sector don't have civil service. The civil service is through the people engineers, level 9, level 10. Then escalated to the principal of engineers, level 12, chief engineers, 13, 14, 15. Then before you go to the management, assistant directors, before you finally go to permanent secretary and go to the commissioner, before it will go to the governor at the state level, to make sure that whatever the governor signs, there's no error. But you see, these days, with the political class, sometimes even take over the responsibility of the civil service because we don't want checks. If a vendor brings a proposal of, say, 500 million, it's just begin and end on the president's table or begin and end on the governor's table. And if it goes to the civil service, of course, they will say, no, they have to go through. They have to look at the costing. Yes, we have procurement processes and so on and so forth. But sometimes we, the politicians, want to run excessively fast for one reason. As a politician, if they elect you as a governor or a president in Nigeria, just have 4 years. So if you have money, you want to quickly do things. And if somebody is delaying, you get angry. But to me, from my experience, I don't think the civil service was much of a problem in terms of executing our projects. My governor then was the minister of FCT. Federal Capital Territory is one of the big ministries because of the volume of work they do. Because the permanent secretary works with a minister or a commissioner, who is the political head of that department of government, that ministry. The permanent secretary heads the civil service. And of course, as a president, if the permanent secretary is not doing too well in a particular department, you can always ask the head of service to move the permanent secretary out to another place. Some of the directors are professional. They can be moved from one ministry to the other. Very few directors that stay in just one ministry till they retire. So if the president or the governor is focused through his ministers and his commissioners, civil servants will not frustrate. The fear and the common statements in Nigeria is that, oh, civil servants even add monies to projects, which your procurement department is supposed to check that. And you can. When I was there, we brought people from the World Bank that were working with my economic advisor, 2 officials from the World Bank, and the World Bank was paying them. So for any major procurement, they will also look through whether it is in line, all those in line with international best in terms of valuation. So a president, especially, you have the opportunity to get assistance from international organizations to give you some technical people to support you. So I don't believe that the civil service is frustrating government that much. Yes, there may be issues, but sometimes if you dig deep into the issues, the civil servant may be correct.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to take just one last. Allez-y, madame. En français ou en anglais?
En français.
En français.
He will interpret it for me.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Excellence, pour ces interventions très pertinentes. C'est un plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui dans cette salle et désolé de parler en français. Je vais aller droit au but. C'est une question. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une jeunesse africaine très engagée, très ambitieuse, mais qui cherche la voie. Vous, en tant que président, avec ce parcours aussi inspirant, qu'est-ce que vous nous conseillez? Quelle est la voie à emprunter pour avoir un parcours aussi inspirant que le vôtre? Pas seulement en devenant président, parce qu'il faut se le dire, on ne peut pas tous devenir président, mais vous avez impacté avant votre présidence, pendant votre présidence, et aujourd'hui, vous continuez d'impacter à travers votre fondation. Qu'est-ce que nous devrons faire en tant que jeunes pour avoir ce parcours comme vous l'avez eu? Merci.
Thank you. I think the key thing is about the youth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any inspiration?
Yes. In Africa, we know, in fact, that's why everybody says Africa is a young continent, because the population of young people is quite high. And sometimes as a leader, the first problem is that how do you manage the young people? And the young people of the present generation, different from when we were young, because of technology. When we were, in those days, we were talking about, oh, the world is a global village. With technology now, the world is a global conference center, just a conference room. Because as we are here, you can reach anywhere. And because of that level of information available to the young people, and of course they are the people who are very technology savvy, they want to run fast. I remember when I finished my first degree, I was not thinking about riding a car immediately. But these days, youths, when they are still undergraduates, they want to ride the best cars. So sometimes they tend to rush excessively, and that pushes them into some behavior that are not acceptable as society. If you look at those who traffic drugs, and maybe in Nigeria this issue of kidnapping and other vices are mainly done by young people because of the desire to get money fast and live like your colleague who is so young, 20-something years, driving a very big car. So the youth also should know that in the river, just have a clear focus of this is where this is where I'm going as a person, and work towards achieving that. Along the line, you may have some obstacles, you may have some challenges, but you will be able to get to the target. Don't allow yourself to be pushed up and down because of the influence of your peer, especially those who are into all kinds of businesses, using the internet fraud and all those things. So the youth, that they are the people who own us. And if Africa must get out of the woods, it's still the young people. You remember the classical the British economists that wrote this essay in 1930, planning for the grandchildren of Britain. And it became a dominant economic essay that government patterned a lot of planning after that. So when we don't plan for our children, then we are planning to fail. People like us, we're almost gone. So if you plan for me, you're wasting time. We have to plan for our grandchildren as a continent. So the youths are very, very relevant, but they must be in position to be trusted and also to hold high offices. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. When we don't plan for our children, we are planning to fail. What an amazing statement a note to end on. And as we exit this moment with former President Goodluck Jonathan, I just want you to have a final message for your peers, for sitting leaders in Africa, for leaders in the global governance, because we're talking about governance in the Sahel, but it's intricately linked to global governance, the way our world is being governed today. And of course, governance from a regional perspective. If you had a last word for how you think leaders, whether at the continental, national, or global level, should behave, one word for each of those layers, for us to succeed as a people and as a world, what would those final words be?
Thank you. It's just one word for all the layers, actually. But leadership is leadership. There's so much literature on leadership. I sometimes don't even read, because sometimes what is written practically doesn't go that way. And because I used to tell people that I remember, was it in the 80s? Yes, I had a friend. That was when the beginning of use of computer for word processing just came into Nigeria. Then we were using electric typewriters after the manual typewriters. And one of my friends, happened to be from my community, established a word processing office in Port Harcourt. And so many people were going there to do word processing. So a small business was booming. Then he wrote a book on management of small businesses. and launched the book. Then, because he had his computer, so he also developed a magazine on marriage counseling, how to counsel husband and wife. Do you know that year, his business collapsed? His wife divorced him. So sometimes I try to separate the theoretical things we read from books from practical realities. So, but basically, for us in Africa, who are privileged to be leaders, especially at the national level, first and foremost, you must take your citizens as the most precious commodities that you have. And you must take the whole of your country as your garden. And if you take, just like if you have a garden, you wouldn't want to see any rubbish anywhere in the garden. You would want to remove it. So if you take your country as your garden, then you want to do the best. And probably that is the difference between the countries that are ruled by kings and emirs compared to the countries that are governed by so-called elected political leaders. Those kings and emirs see the whole country as their own asset, and they do the best. So if you go, so you will say, yes, it's not the top level of practice of governance that you want to see, because we are meant to understand that democracy is the best. It may not be democratic. Probably you may never be minister of finance or whatever, except you are from only a section of the country and some of the citizens as their own. Clearly speaking, some of them have stayed in those countries for upward of 5 years, 10 years in their silos. So no nutrients again. The locally grown one, even richer in terms of food value. But people, because of the other one is police, so why this? So I said, look, in State House, you will not cook anything other than rice grown in Nigeria. You must use yourself, the way you do things. You have to demonstrate.
Really showing appreciation to Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, my own honorable boss lady as well. Fantastic. Didn't realize that we were wasting your talent in UNDP. Now we know what to do and how to use you better. But I wanted to very quickly say that, you know, the president, we negotiated for him to bring us some of his books, some copies of his book, My Transition Hour. So I'm encouraging all of you, it's out there at the reception desk. Take a moment and get a copy for yourself. It's at the reception desk. And the president was so gracious to make sure that we get it at a fraction of the real price. So please get a copy for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Like Madam Mahuna said, just to summarize their panel, the conversation they just had, we now know that there is this need for leaders. This thing is not working. Hello? Okay, fine.
One, two, one, two. One, two, one, two.
Yes, moving on. We cannot overemphasize the need for leaders in the Sahel to cultivate humility, foresight, and servant leadership, as discussed in the last conversation. As we gather here today, as we are gathered in this room today, I'm sure many of us or all of us are aware that millions of people across the Sahel are facing unprecedented challenges. That is a statement of fact. From poverty and inequality to climate change and insecurity. Yet we also know and are very much aware that the Sahel is a region of immense potential, rich in natural resources, cultural heritage, and resilient communities. The next panel will explore how governance can be a catalyst for unlocking this potential and achieving shared prosperity for all. And to lead us in that panel, I would like to call on Mr. Alassane Guy, Director, Good Governance, Ministry of Justice, Senegal. Is he in the room? Yes, please, he's the moderator. Please help me welcome Mr. Alassane Guy. Guy, okay, sorry, I murdered his name.
Bonjour à tous. Voilà, donc je vais interpeller donc les différents intervenants qui vont venir. Et je pense qu'on a Nana Sissoko, Vice-President of Women Leaders Platform.
Do you want me to call the names?
Hmm?
Do you want me to call them? Do you want me to introduce them?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be calling on the panelists. We have Nane Sissoko, Vice President of the Women Leaders Platform of Mali. Is she here? We have His Excellency Senator Bala Mohammed, Governor of Bauchi State. Mr. Lamin Barrow, Director General, African Development Bank. His Excellency Anadif Salem Mahamat, former Special Representative of the Secretary General and Chad's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chad. And of course, our dear friend and big brother, Mustafa Njai Taf, CEO and founder of TAF Africa Global.
Bonjour à tous. On remercie les différents intervenants qui se sont succédés aujourd'hui et aussi hier. On a remarqué que c'était un panel très enrichissant. Je ne sais pas si tout le monde est là, tous les intervenants. Vous pouvez vérifier également que c'est un panel vraiment très riche avec différents intervenants. C'est un panel vraiment très riche avec différents intervenants. Et c'est l'Afrique qui gagne. Donc on va parler tout à l'heure le potentiel des ressources naturelles que nous avons à travers notre continent. On va passer la parole donc de la droite jusqu'à la fin. On va commencer par monsieur. Votre nom, c'est quoi? Oui, c'est ça. On va commencer par monsieur Nano Sissoko. Il va nous parler donc sur son exposé, le potentiel que nous avons en Afrique, les ressources que nous avons également, la stratégie qu'on doit mettre en place pour une gouvernance transparente. Ah, il n'est pas là? Ah, d'accord. Bon, vu qu'il n'est pas là, on va passer peut-être la parole au suivant. Monsieur Bala Mohamed, gouverneur Boshi Estate, vous avez la parole.
Hello, hello. Hello.
Ah, okay.
Thank you, Your Excellencies and distinguished members of the panel and all the invited guests. First, I must thank the Good Luck Foundation, my boss, the former president of Nigeria, and of course the UNDP, the global body, and our dear sister that we're very proud of, and all the international bodies or organizations that package this very outstanding conference. I think all the things that need to be said have been said in the past. It is difficult to talk after your boss has spoken. Mr. President, and of course the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations in charge of the UNDP has given us all the hallmark of this conversation on governance. But certainly, since this is specifically on prosperity, prospects, and what we need to do to ensure that we get the best out of our resources, we still have areas there where we can talk. I will be talking mostly from the perspective of the subnational. I must be grateful that the international bodies and Good Luck Jonathan Foundation gave opportunity for those of us that are working at the subnational level for the first time to talk in this kind of international arena where governance has been discussed. Because majority of Africans in the Sahel live at the subnational level and of course within the local governments or local authorities. So we face these challenges of poverty and lack of growth. Everything is about governance and management of scarce resources. Our resources are not even scarce. We have abundance, and yet we are living in poverty, in abject poverty. And of course, it has to do with so many factors. I will also give a little testimonial on my own part as a governor of a state that has over 8 million people. and to underscore how scarce resources can be managed to at least make a difference, leave legacies and landmarks. It all has to do with the planning and understanding, coming with the baseline studies, knowing where you are and where you will be, and how you will deploy scarce resources to carry on or carry along the bureaucracy and to leverage on extra resources from donor agencies, from the federal government, and to raise IGR. And of course, deploy the human capital that is available. And if it is not available, try to leverage on consultancy and other means so that you can do good procurement, managing resources in a manner that it will make an impact. We have so many resources. In my state, we have almost everything. Good arable land, over 4.2 million hectares of arable land that are mostly reserved forests because they cannot be developed. And we have mineral resources like gold, tantalite, lithium, and all the other precious materials. But certainly we work under the federal government where such things are under the exclusive reserve of the federal government. It is just contingent upon any governor to find ways and means of partnering with the federal government. And that's why we set up special purpose vehicle where we become participant, even though we are only restricted to deployment of community agreement when people come with licenses from the federal government. Again, we have opportunity for renewable energy and so on and so forth. But certainly, we seem to be stagnant, staying where we are. Maybe the perception of governance, as explained by President Jonathan, and well elucidated by the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, our regional director for UNDP, has really placed everything on the table. How do we move from there in the midst of plenty? How do we add value? So what we did, or what we must do, is to be able to know where we are and what we have on the ground and how to take strategic means to be able to achieve our desired objective. So you must have a plan. You must know where you are. You must carry the youth and the women. You cannot make empty promises. Right from onset as political leaders, we must be careful of our promises so that there will be trust, so that you will know you will deploy your scarce resources to achieving what you have. We came in when we had only 300 million naira as IGR in my state with a population of 8 million because there had been a lot of leakages, a lot of sharp practices in the management of IGR. At a point, IGR is even the exclusive reserve of the governor. It is not deployed or imputed in the budget. And we came not minding the informal sector that is producing most of the IGR, just the taxes. And then you see you cannot criminalize poverty because we have a state where most of the people are not educated in the formal way, but they are knowledgeable. So we had to really prepare our youth in agriculture because you cannot mop up all those people that are not employed and are not employable in the context of Western parlance or governance because they cannot work in the office. They cannot speak English, but they are very good in terms of knowledge. They are exposed even in the Quranic education. Their brains are opened, and they are always open to media. And so you have to be careful. They become so willing tool in terms of indoctrination. So we had an agri policy that really created ways and means for the young people to be put back to the farms, giving startups so that at the end of the day they become demonstration farms. We really created a lot of prosperity along that line, where young people, graduates, or those with diplomas will be able to employ their kins and kin. At the end of the day, they will make 20, 30 million naira. And that is a lot from poverty to prosperity. And in solid minerals, we came up with a policy whereby we don't allow our community leaders, our traditional rulers, to sign community agreements for the foreigners, mostly the Chinese, to come and cut away our common resources. We become part and parcel as a state government with the process of the business so that we take equity. At the end of the day, if you aggregate what we are getting in terms of equity, you will see that we are making so much money away from what we are normally getting from the federal coffers, from the federation account. And the activities itself put our own young people, our women, on the threshold of deep understanding to exploit their potentials, to be part of governance, to be respected because they are really connected with the government. And by so doing, we are able to create awareness that governance is about collective responsibility. I will give you an example of the COVID when it came. It was almost unheard of for people not to be allowed to go to mosque. But because we brought the emirs, we brought the religious leaders from all persuasion, we were able to convince people not to go. We opened halfway. We didn't close everything in terms of going out to make a living, because most of our people get their daily meal daily. And so at the end of the day, there was clear understanding. Even in terms of insecurity that is stopping people from going to work, from going to farm, we make sure we use the same means of connectivity that we created between local authorities, community leaders, to know that we will police our villages, we will police our farms and our forests in a manner that we held our traditional rulers, our religious leaders accountable. By sheer respect, I'm giving them responsibilities that are outside the provision of our Nigerian constitution. By so doing, we had cells that are giving us information, and we are collaborating. And when we stop the practice of informers that are collaborating with those that are driven by poverty, to give the right of way, I would say, for those coming to abduct and do all sorts of criminality. So the whole issue of governance is looking at the planning stage, the understanding of your problems and challenges at the Sahel. The Sahel has so much potentials. We are bombarded by environmental factors because the Sahara is moving, and if we don't stop it, definitely through agriculture and so on and so forth, will not be there. And looking at our own limitations and inadequacies in terms of the manpower. Manpower is very low. I know my boss has spoken about trust to the bureaucracy. In some of the state and local governments, we don't even have the bureaucracy. The orientation is that sometimes they don't even go to office. And as a governor, at the subnational level, the most important thing is supervision. You must be there 24/7. I had the opportunity of being at the federal level, and I came to Limelight through the goodwill of my boss here with all humility, because I only came to Abuja to be a senator, and later I became the minister of FCT. So I was exposed to the act of governance, partnership with the international bodies, partnership with local authorities, looking at the health system, looking at the educational system, which are the key for showing deliverables in terms of governance. And of course, that has helped us a lot. And I think at the local level or at the subnational level, we need to know that leadership should be driven by knowledge, by clear understanding of where you are, by knowing the basics of what are your problems, and deploying those little resources you have judiciously. My boss has spoken about the issue of procurement. We know most of the common people or the ordinary people look at us with suspicion because of the prevalence of our invoicing. Project that can be done with 100,000, it can go to 1 million. So, and this is true. It's a testimony I'm giving you. We built over 7,000 classrooms to remove the prevalence of out-of-school children in my state. through collaboration with international bodies. The UNDP has been there to build our system, UNICEF and the rest, and we show fidelity, sincerity in terms of governance in such a manner that we are trusted. Trust is the key word, because there is nothing we are looking for. If somebody becomes a senator, I rose as a director on the system at the federal level, and I was given opportunity to be the minister of the Federal Capital Territory with a lot of temptations from somebody that hardly had anything in common with, that is President Jonathan, who are not even in the same party. We don't share even the religious faith together. Even my zone is different from him, and he gave me the opportunity to come to limelight. So I was driven by the passion to leave legacies and landmarks. So leaders must impute their own end result. What would they be? Would they want to be somebody like Jonathan, or they want to be like others, where they are seen with disdain, where they acquire so much that they don't need? So our own passion is to make sure we leave legacies and landmarks and do things better. I don't talk about my own predecessors. What I did was to draw a line. In terms of accountability, I asked them to fear God. I don't have to go to court with you because it's the responsibility of the police. But certainly, I will not waste my time. I must hit the ground running from day one and looking at my own period of 4 years. So I thank you for the opportunity.
Merci beaucoup pour cette belle intervention. C'est très riche, hein, donc on vous remercie. On va essayer de passer la parole à Madame Fatou Diagne, qui travaille également donc au Centre de Human Rights. Madame Fatou Diagne, on vous passe la parole. Si le micro ne passe pas, allez-y.
Merci. Je prends. Merci, Monsieur Gay. Nadine, where are you? I had to say something at the last minute, but I think it's important that our voices are heard. I think since yesterday, we've noticed the gap in terms of the panels. I believe everybody mentioned it and reiterated that we have the competencies in the region, in Africa. But I believe that in most of the positions, we still have men. And that is why in these conferences, the representation gap is visible. So my colleague from Mali is not around. I was asked to say a few words about the topic. I'm going to intervene in the next panel. But I just believe that the issue of governance is important in terms of the economic governance. And what we've noticed on the continent is the playing field is not level. And unless we really look into our policies and make sure that they are engendered, I think the issue of discrepancy will still remain. We talked about all the issues around oil and gas, the natural resources. I think often we forget that the world is transforming, and we need to look into the digital world, the data. Today, we are talking about data. And in most African countries, we're overlooking that sector, which is very important, and it's a sector that is growing very fast. And I believe that this is also a wealth that we need to manage properly. When I looked at the countries around Senegal, Gambia, that I know quite a lot, when you look at our policies in terms of land, we talk about agriculture. Women don't own land. The land tenure, the laws are still really, following the traditional route. Today, we need to do some reforms in terms of land tenure. Women don't generally inherit land in many parts of, especially in the rural areas, because we have the system where men inherit the majority. And what it does in general is that women will cultivate the land, but they will not be able to own it. And what happens? If you need collateral to go to the banks, you will not be able to get it. So what we've seen is that women are doing a lot of the small businesses, but we need to scale up those businesses. And for that to happen, we need to have banking sectors that are receptive, but more importantly, we need to have governments that are really putting in place policies that will respond to the needs, but also reform some of the traditional way of doing things to ensure that, land is owned by women in the rural areas especially. And also, I'll talk about local content. When I was in Senegal, I was sitting in what they call the GMP, in the extractive industry. We have a tripartite kind of committees where you have civil society, extractive industries, and government. And what we've realized that is most of the resources that were levied, in the mining sectors particularly, there were percentage that will go back to the communities for rehabilitation, for support, for education, for some other social services. But what we've realized that for many years, the government will not redistribute that equally. And in most of the communities that are affected by, these mining sectors, what we've seen is that women, have lost their livelihood because most of the agricultural areas have been used now for mining, and they have not been rehabilitated properly, and many women are displaced. So I think these are also areas that we need to look into when we're talking about the extractive sector and some other minerals that are being exploited in our different countries. I came to this panel just to say that really governance is an important thing, but we need to be deliberate about the policies if we want things to change. But representation also should not just be a lip service. We need to ensure that the policies that are put in place are gender responsive to ensure that these resources that we've been talking about all these 2 days are distributed equally and ensure that women have their fair share. But importantly, I think in our countries, if we want investments to grow and women to participate, we need to look into our banking sectors. The last point I want to mention is the Gambia, for example. Today, if you want to take a loan, it's 28%. Nobody will do proper business where banks will give you a loan with a rate of 25 to 28%, because government should intervene and ensure that women have proper collateral if you want them also to be part of, the development. Yeah. So I just want to stop there. I was not supposed to be in this panel, but I thought with Nadine's intervention that I will just say a few words. Unfortunately, we don't have enough women in these kind of gatherings. And I just want also to say something about the Sahel, the women of the Sahel, the civil society. I know we have not heard about that. Given my background, I work with people still in the ground. I know sometimes it's very difficult for them to speak out. Freedom of expression has been really a problem in Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Mali. We've heard a lot of detention. We've heard a lot of distress. Yesterday, Minister Gadio talked about the issues around the Pearl. I think we need also to look into the human rights dimension of the Sahel crisis, because what is happening will affect the economics, but what is happening, I think we cannot do we cannot build peace if we overlook what is happening on the ground. And people are suffering, women are suffering, and many women are displaced because of what's happening. So I just want also to share that from the ground, from the colleagues that I've been working with. Lawyers are detained in some of the countries for just speaking out. Lawyers have been detained for just defending people. So we need also this forum to have that as part of the takeaway. Yes, peace, but justice is the underlying thing if you want peace and development. Thank you.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Madame Diagne, pour cette belle intervention. Vous avez parlé donc des secteurs miniers, du pétrole, du gaz. Vous avez parlé également sur le secteur bancaire. Et on aura donc l'occasion d'interroger M. Barrault, qui travaille également dans ce secteur. Vous savez que ce que vous avez dit est tellement vrai. On ne peut pas parler de la bonne gouvernance sans parler de la sécurité. On ne peut pas parler de la bonne gouvernance sans parler de la justice. Et tout le monde est d'accord que le pilier fondamental de la bonne gouvernance, c'est d'abord la justice et la paix et la sécurité. Et moi, je vais aller plus loin que cela, parce que c'est vrai que ce forum est tellement important qu'on parle de la bonne gouvernance, mais également, je pense que tout le monde est d'accord qu'entre le Sénégal et la Gambie, même pas 1 heure de vol, on n'a pas la même monnaie. La Mauritanie et le Sénégal également, 2 pays voisins, on n'a pas la même monnaie. Et je pense qu'on peut élargir encore ce sujet. Et sur ce aussi, je vais en profiter pour donner la parole à M. Lamine Barrault, directeur général African Development Bank. Je voudrais dire également, concernant ce qu'il a dit, Mme Diagne, sur l'accès à l'information. Aujourd'hui, tout le monde se félicite de la loi sur l'accès à l'information en Gambie. Hier, j'ai eu l'occasion de discuter avec Madame l'ancienne ministre qui a donc dirigé la rédaction de cette loi. Et donc, on leur félicite parce que c'est une belle loi. Également, hier, le Sénégal a également donc adopté en Conseil des ministres la loi sur l'accès à l'information. Ça, c'est des paramètres qu'on doit mettre dans tous les pays pour que les citoyens aient l'information qu'il faudrait. Effectivement, on ne peut pas avoir toutes les informations, comme des informations sur le secret défense, mais il y a certaines informations que le peuple a besoin pour que la bonne gouvernance soit au milieu, pour que la bonne gouvernance soit vraiment donc, un sujet qui n'est plus tabou. Monsieur Barrault, je vous passe la parole et vous nous parlez un peu également aussi sur la bonne gouvernance par rapport au secteur minier, le pétrole et le gaz, mais aussi par rapport donc, au secteur bancaire. Vous avez la parole.
Yeah, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gay. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I first wish to thank UNDP and its partners, the Goodluck Jonathan Foundation, and the government of Gambia for hosting this very, very timely forum on governance in the Sahel. I think over the 2 days we gathered here, we've talked a lot about the paradox of having very significant natural and human resources in the region, yet we have not been able to successfully transform these resources and assets to drive sustainable development and reduce poverty in the region. The Sahel, as the report that was launched yesterday indicated, is endowed with a lot of resources, mineral resources. Talk about gold, oil, and bauxite, even the critical minerals. And these resources translate into revenues where the extractive industries account for a huge share of the revenues of countries, as high as 20% in Mauritania, citing 2018 statistics, to as low as 1.7% in Niger. And of course, the challenge related to this is the fact that we tend to export raw materials and don't add value to them. So exporting jobs and exporting prosperity. So governance is a key driver of the fragility dynamics in the Sahel region. And this is fueled, this has ineffective governance and governance gaps and deficits have fueled the really inimical socio-economic situation faced in these countries, which are facing a triangle of disaster. You have high levels of poverty and high levels of unemployment, especially for the youth, and then aggravated by the global shocks like climate change, a lot of drought, and in fact at times flooding also affecting these regions. So what do we do to tap the potentials? If you look at, for instance, the agro-pastoral potential, the livestock sector alone accounts for about, on average, 25% of the gross agricultural value production in these countries. Land and water resources need to be better managed and more effectively because it's a scarce resource, and it also accounts for a lot of the fragility that we see in the region, where at least 31% of the population in the core Sahel states are living in areas that have a very, very high degree of water risk, whether in terms of droughts, whether in terms of also flooding. And this is creating conflicts also with the problems of the commons. So at the heart of all these solutions we seek is about leadership and governance. I think we were very privileged to hear President Jonathan share his insights, very deep insights communicated in very simple and easy to digest language about leadership. And your conclusion about majesties looking at their countries as gardens, I think is very, very fitting. And we all have to, I think, behave like leaders so that we can contribute to this agenda of improving good governance. For us, good governance at African Development Bank is also at the heart of our operations. It's a cross-cutting issue that is mainstream in all the operations that we support. And it starts from, first of all, the allocation of resources. It's performance-based allocation, and part of this performance, governance, and especially policy and institutional performance, is a key criteria for allocating resources to member countries. And in our operations, usually we provide budget support operations for good governance and framed around the importance of having strong public financial management systems, in terms of the transparency, the accountability, and also inclusiveness, to make sure that public revenues are managed judiciously to enhance development impacts. And at the heart of this also is around the issue of domestic resource mobilization. We're all witnessing the changing geopolitics, dwindling official development assistance, which actually contributes less to our development financing needs than to what is collected from domestic resources and even diaspora remittances. So there is scope to improve on domestic resource mobilization, but I think equally importantly is also how do we expend these resources to make sure that we're investing in the right places, whether in terms of infrastructure, social infrastructure, educational and health facilities, and also inclusive development approaches that will help drive transformative change in our economies. Very important around the Sahel, I think, is the issue of natural resources governance. As we all know, we have all these natural resources, but we're not doing enough to diversify our economies by adding value to what we produce, and also strengthening regional cooperation so that we have a more harmonized approach, whether in terms of attracting private investment, and it is private investment that is going to create the jobs and reduce the poverty. It's not the business of governments to do that. So it's important that we work together, regional approach and harmonized approaches to engage and partner with the private sector. Very important, I think the governor spoke about, and others, the issues of, let's say, artisanal mining, which is creating also big challenges in terms of the environmental impact of activities, but also leakages, fueling illicit economies and illicit financial flows. You see also many of these conflicts taking place, not only in the Sahel, but in many other parts of Africa, is driven mainly by those cartels. The president talked about cartels, but these are the ones fueling these conflicts and making sure that our countries and our continent is deprived of the stability and also the right investments to transform. So artisanal mining needs to have incentives and the right policy actions to make sure that they move more into formality and is better regulated, so that also the benefits of all these natural resources also cascade and trickle down to the population. We have been supporting countries, particularly in the core Sahel, also to enhance their revenue mobilization, by also digitizing their tax collection systems, but also providing incentives to negotiate and structure win-win partnerships with mining companies and other natural resource extraction activities for the benefit of the economies and to build inclusive societies. But for these things to happen also, we must strengthen governance institutions. It's creating the institutions, that are more critically needed in Africa, so that we can, move beyond personality-driven politics to have more accountable and transparent institutions. And at the heart of it, decentralized governance becomes important, working with communities, making sure that the women and the youth are effectively represented in decision-making structures and organs. The former Vice President of the Gambia spoke about this eloquently today, and of course the fellow panelists mentioned these things. But these are all important because without the transparency, governments cannot be held very accountable to do the things they are supposed to do and to create the conditions for prosperity. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup pour conserver le micro. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Directeur. Vous avez fait une belle intervention en mentionnant des idées très intéressantes telles que la reddition des comptes. Vous savez que c'est très souvent en Afrique qu'on parle de reddition des comptes. Mais dans certains pays, on ne parle pas de reddition des comptes parce que c'est un circuit normal. Mais en Afrique, on attend une gestion annuelle pour faire la reddition des comptes. Et moi, j'ai toujours dit que c'est trop tard. Comment, par exemple, on peut, je ne sais pas, un exemple, un ministre qui a son budget, qui gère son budget pendant 12 mois, vous attendez la fin des 12 mois pour faire la reddition des comptes. Mais même s'il a détourné, effectivement, l'argent n'est plus là. Donc je pense que la reddition des comptes, moi j'ai toujours proposé que ça doit être soit semestriel, trimestriel, mais pas annuel. Je pense qu'il a parlé tout à l'heure des solutions pour une gouvernance locale, renforcer le système, mais surtout, il a parlé également sur le secteur minier, comment en Afrique on peut avoir beaucoup plus de ressources naturelles qu'à travers le monde et qu'on est toujours, bon, je ne dis pas le mot pauvre, mais on est traité comme sous-pays développé. C'est parce qu'il y a un problème de gestion des ressources naturelles. Et je pense que c'est l'occasion quand même pour chaque pays de voir comment renforcer la gouvernance locale, de voir également comment donc travailler avec la société civile. Pour gagner du temps, vu qu'on est un peu nombreux, on va faire maximum 5 minutes. Il a également parlé quand même des points très intéressants tels que les contrats. Vous savez que chaque gouvernement, chaque régime qui vient négocie les contrats. Et la gouvernance, la bonne gouvernance n'accepte pas ça. Normalement, un contrat, c'est un contrat pour un État, mais pas un contrat pour un régime. Donc, monsieur le directeur, on vous remercie pour cette belle prestation. Vous avez également parlé aussi de la gestion transparente. On ne peut pas avoir tant de ressources naturelles sans avoir une gestion transparente. Et merci pour ces propositions. On va donner la parole à M. Anadif Saleh Mohamed, qui travaille également dans le ministère des Affaires étrangères donc du Tchad. Malheureusement, on va réduire le temps de parole, maximum 5 minutes. Je vous donne la parole. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. J'avoue qu'en écoutant, bon, la majorité sont des gens de terrain qui ont pratiqué ce genre de choses. Mais je voudrais quand même d'abord remercier un peu les organisateurs pour m'avoir invité. Et j'avoue que j'avais eu peur quand j'ai eu le terme de référence, parce que dans les termes de référence, on risque d'être hors sujet. J'ai vu qu'il faudrait se concentrer sur la gouvernance financière. C'est ça qui est dans les termes de référence. Et donc, moi, dans ma réflexion, je me suis dit, on ne peut pas parler de gouvernance financière sans parler de gouvernance politique. Parce que c'est le politique qui dicte tout. Et donc, ça me ramène au leadership de quelqu'un qui veut gouverner un pays. Ce soit lui qui doit tracer le cap. Les finances, la gestion financière, c'est quelque chose d'un degré un peu plus bas. Et donc, tout ce qui a été dit, c'est de la responsabilité du politique. Comment avoir une justice juste? Je ne dis pas une justice indépendante, mais je dis une justice juste. Parce que souvent, dans nos pays, les entreprises ou autres ont des problèmes parce que la justice ne dit pas le droit, mais plutôt quelquefois, on a des sociétés corrompues et qui fait que la corruption agit beaucoup. Et quelquefois, il y a des sociétés qui ont été déclarées pratiquement en faillite parce qu'on les a condamnées. Et donc, moi, j'ai dit que c'est d'abord, il nous faut situer la responsabilité du politique. Qui veut avoir le pouvoir? Je comprends le gouverneur, par exemple, lui, il a géré ça sur le terrain et il a eu à sa façon de faire. Donc, moi, je me dis, le politique doit tout faire pour qu'on ait une justice juste. Le politique doit tout faire pour qu'il y ait des institutions qui diminuent les procédures administratives qui empêchent à ce que les gens puissent créer très facilement leur société. Mais nos jeunes, on ne peut pas dire qu'on va former tout le monde, mais nos jeunes, nos femmes ont besoin uniquement d'une éducation civique, comment leur apprendre à être entrepreneurs, comment leur apprendre à mieux gérer. Je crois que la responsabilité doit être d'abord du politique. Moi, quand je choisis, je me dis, je vais être président, je vais être premier ministre, je vais être un tel. Je m'engage. Et c'est là notre rôle, le rôle politique, à mon avis. Le reste, c'est un dispositif qu'on doit mettre. Et ce que je dis ici, ou ce que nous disons, n'est pas valable uniquement pour les pays sahéliens. C'est partout en Afrique que nous constatons qu'il y a la mauvaise gestion qui est à la base de tout, la mauvaise gouvernance. Et tant qu'on ne résout pas cette question de leadership, on ne peut pas parler des autres aspects qui ne sont que les conséquences en fait de cette gestion, où quand on a quelqu'un qui veut accéder au pouvoir, il doit avoir une vision. Et donc tout à l'heure, quelqu'un a parlé de la vision. Il faut que le type ait une vision, il faut qu'il y ait une planification. Et j'ai l'habitude toujours de parler de Sankara. Pourquoi je parle de Sankara? Parce que Sankara, aujourd'hui, dont tout le monde parle, Sankara n'a gouverné que 4 ans. De 83 à 87, où il a été assassiné. Mais aujourd'hui, qu'on le veuille ou pas, au Burkina, il y a un esprit Sankara. Sankara a éduqué, Sankara a passé un message. Et c'est ce message-là aujourd'hui qui fait qu'avant les coups d'État et autres, le Burkinabé était reconnu comme quelqu'un de moins corrompu. Le Burkinabé était quelqu'un qui respecte le bien public. Parce que Sankara, quand il était au pouvoir, il avait sa voiture comme tout autre. Parce qu'il faut que les dirigeants donnent l'exemple. Il ne faut pas que les dirigeants, toutes les richesses, ils se l'accaparent, et lui et sa famille et ses copains, ses amis, c'est ça qui fait le problème. Et donc souvent, je ne dis pas que l'Afrique est pauvre, moi je dis que l'Afrique est riche. Mais elle n'est pas développée à cause de ces dirigeants qui veulent seulement le pouvoir, mais sans penser au développement de leur pays. Donc, moi je crois que c'est toute une philosophie, c'est toute une culture. On me parle des mines, par exemple. Les mines sont devenues laissées artisanales. Mais les mines doivent être sous le contrôle de l'État, qui devrait en faire une richesse nationale, et pour qu'il y ait une justice sociale. Parce que quand je vois nos amis des institutions financières, vous parlez d'une croissance à 2 chiffres. Mais les gens ne mangent pas la croissance. C'est pour la bonne image d'un pays, on parle d'une bonne croissance. Mais le citoyen ordinaire, est-ce qu'il ressent cette croissance à 2 chiffres? Et tant qu'on ne place pas le citoyen au centre de nos préoccupations, on ne pourra pas développer nos pays, qu'ils soient sahéliens ou qu'ils soient d'une autre partie. Et donc, moi, ma vision, quand on m'a dit de parler plutôt de gouvernance financière pour me résumer, j'ai dit on ne peut pas parler de gouvernance financière sans parler de gouvernance politique. La responsabilité de la régulation, de la bonne gestion, de la bonne distribution, pour que chaque citoyen, même si vous avez 10 francs, mais s'il est équitablement partagé, je crois qu'il y a un minimum de justice sociale. Si on encourage le secteur privé, parce que c'est le secteur privé qui doit, mais il faut encourager la création d'entreprises, il faut leur faciliter ce qu'on appelle.
Effectivement, vous avez parlé des points aussi intéressants de la gouvernance politique et la gouvernance financière. Il y a même qui parle de la gouvernance, parce que c'est le résumé donc de la gouvernance économique. C'est pourquoi les collègues qui ont abordé ces sujets aussi sur le secteur minier, c'était très intéressant. On vous remercie pour votre intervention, vraiment qui est très intéressant. Lorsque vous parlez de la justice sociale, quand même, ça mérite beaucoup plus d'attention parce que c'est une expression que tous les États africains devraient s'approprier. Je pense hier, on a parlé de 54 pays africains. Je pense que c'est le Dr Gadio qui parlait de cela. Il faudrait qu'on avance au-delà du Sahel. Donc là, vu qu'on est confronté à un problème de timing, on va passer la parole à notre frère Moustapha Ndié, qui est également fondateur of TAF Africa Global. On vous passe la parole, Monsieur Moustapha Ndié.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll stand on existing protocols and thank the UNDP with partners and the Good Luck Jonathan Foundation. But let me also just mention our auntie and mother, Auntie Fatmata, living in a country like a small village and following, tradition, we have to mention her. Let me now intervene. I mean, it is said in English that he who laughs last laughs best. But in this case here, it seems that I am speaking last, but time is limited. So I'm trying to now refocus and rather than address the natural resources, first make an introduction so you understand why I am sitting here. I am from the private sector, different from my members of the panel, so I represent the private sector. But also reflect on what His Excellency President Goodluck Jonathan said yesterday and today, because it resonates so well with me, though I am coming from the private sector. Yesterday you did say that you're worried about these conferences and wealth needs to be created. And I come from the private sector, so that resonates very well with me. We need to create wealth. But my specialty is in housing development, and more so affordable housing development. And we've launched a very gigantic initiative in Africa to develop 1 million affordable homes over the next 20 years. And now we're trying to align it with Agenda 2063. So I want to focus more on human capital, because construction is very labor intensive. And again, in construction, we employ more of the youth. Again, by coincidence, I am operating in the south side of Nigeria. I'm Gambian, coming from a population of 2.5 million population. But building the biggest estate in Nigeria during your tenure, and I want to clearly state some testimonies here, some very positive testimonies, which probably you might not even know about. And that resonates with what you were narrating today. Because I was invited to develop the Riftaf Golf Estate, 1,200 units of $166 million by the then Governor Rotimi Amechi. So yes, sitting with the PDP. And here I will also want to bring in some of the major risks that we go through in Africa, which is political. And cite some examples, because I was there when you lost elections, and we had an APC government. But I am still there. So in 2012, just fast track, when we went in there, Naira at your time was maximum 200 Naira to the dollar. Today, it's 1,550 Naira to the dollar. Again, when I went in there, we were benefactors of a pioneer status. So again, good governance. We followed all the right channels without even knowing your government. I mean, these were issued by the federal government, though we signed up with the state government. But we enjoy a pioneer status. And what this means, if you're from the Gambia, it means a development certificate or whatever, but a development incentive. But we enjoyed 5-year tax-free in housing development in Port Harcourt. But then kudos to your government. And we didn't have to call anybody. We just followed the right steps, hired a consultant who followed the right channels, and we were issued this. Now, challenges that we have had. Okay, the Riftaf Golf Estate is history. Finances were raised in Nigeria again. I mean, I happen to know late Herbert Igwe, who was a friend of mine, just to tell you the resources that are available in Nigeria. So I do encounter this all the time with the DFIs when they come to us and they want to ask you to bring your late grandmother, for collateral and so on. The late Herbert Igwe walked onto my side. I said, look, Taff, I know you. You will not run with my money. I want to put money into this project. And guess what? A week later, I went to Lagos to see him casually and walked out of his office with $25 million, only in Nigeria. So, Mr. President, some of the things that they tell you about these countries, I mean, and as we say in Nigeria, what the Oyibos tells you, it's different from the reality. Some of these things can only happen in economies as big as Nigeria. So that is history. So you can imagine, but let me tell you some of the challenges we've had during your tenure. When the governor now moved and they put up APC, we had signed up with Chevron to seal, it was signed, sealed, and done for 250 units. And the week that Amici moved into APC, 200 units were cancelled. Loss of confidence. And that is why political risk is so high in Africa. I mean, I want to, under this conference, not only focus on the Sahel, because they are all similar. So political risk is important, governance is important. So that is something negative that we have had, but we've moved on. From there, again, as you know, in Port Harcourt, we've now transitioned from Amechi into Governor Wike. Now Governor Simalai Fubara is there. And you know the troubles that are there now. We don't even have a governor. He has been suspended. But with Governor Simalai Fubara, we have signed to build 20,000 housing units. As we speak, we are the biggest in affordable housing, not only in Nigeria, but in the whole of the continent. So political risk comes with doing business in Africa. Now let me talk about leadership, because I'm very passionate about leadership. And again, life after anything that you do, not only in the presidency, but even as a businessman. I started this business 35 years ago. Today, as I said, I have business in Nigeria, but I'm not there. And I don't have one single Gambian working for me in Nigeria. So when I hear people talk about Nigerians and how corrupt they are, or whatever, the negative things about Nigeria, I mean, I am different. But the reason why we have been able to succeed is because we have proper governance in place. So governance is not only synonym, or doesn't only apply to the public sector, but it also applies to the private sector. So you need to put in the good structures of governance to be able to operate. So we have proper governance structures in place. Merci. Then the other thing is, yes, I know, I don't want to tell the story why I am sitting here. So please allow me 3 minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute?
Yes, please.
I'll negotiate for 3. I'll just do like my brother graduated yesterday. 2 extra minutes wouldn't harm. So I want to talk about the social issue also. Some of the reasons why we are going what we're going through in terms of insecurity. I think it is the responsibility of all leaders, be it in the corporate or the public sector, to be socially responsible. Some of the problems that we have today, not only in the Sahel, in the sub-region, is because of the unfair distribution of the national cake. Because corruption doesn't only happen with the public sector. It takes 2 to tango. Those of us in the private sector benefit, and probably we corrupt those that are in the public sector, so we are all liable. So I think to solve insecurity in the Sahel, there needs to be a fair distribution of the national wealth and create opportunities. In creating wealth, you need to create opportunities. I will go further. I think I've been lucky to sit in some panel again later today, because I want to talk about our educational curriculum. It needs to be addressed, because we are training for the wrong jobs. I think it is said in agriculture that you should grow what you eat and eat what you grow. Same thing should be applied in education. We are training for jobs that we don't have. We do know that, quite a number of these kids, they drop out at a certain age. And I'll give you the final example is what I see today. I mean, we all wear our African outfit like Your Excellency. I mean, I have my tailors in Abuja, in Benin, in Dakar, and guess what? In Abuja, somebody who's a lady studied mass communication. A master's in mass communication. Today she's a seamstress. The guy who did this was working for Sonatel, a telecommunication engineer, now is running a men's outfit. Same thing applies to somebody in Benin. So skills, hard skills, we need to emphasize that there's the need to spend more on hard skills. If we want to stop insecurity, we need to invest more on hard skill, knowing that all the skills, for example, in the Gambia, within the educational system between early childhood and secondary, there are 1 million kids in there. And how many universities do we have? 1 or 2 universities. So please, I think those who are in government and also in policy need to invest more on hard skills. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Merci. C'est une très belle intervention de M. Moustapha. Je sais que vous avez les idées, mais malheureusement, donc, on a un problème de temps. Sinon, on aurait pu vous donner beaucoup plus de temps pour pouvoir développer. On remercie également le peuple, le public. Avant de quitter, je pense que je vais faire moi une proposition en tant que modérateur, mais en tant que aussi directeur de la bonne gouvernance. Je pense que chacun de nous, de nos différents États, on devrait disposer d'un directeur de la bonne gouvernance s'il n'y a pas de ministère de la bonne gouvernance. Et ce directeur de la bonne gouvernance devrait élaborer une stratégie nationale de la bonne gouvernance. Nous, au niveau du Sénégal, j'ai déjà entamé cette stratégie qui concerne tous les ministères, également la société civile. Et je pense que si on a nous tous des stratégies ficelées ensemble avec la société civile et le gouvernement, ça pourrait nous aider à vraiment régler beaucoup de problèmes de la gestion financière, de la gestion politique, gestion économique, etc. Et je vous remercie, chers panélistes. Je remercie également donc, le public. Je pense qu'on va pouvoir donc, arrêter ce débat-là et prendre une photo de famille ensemble. Merci beaucoup.
Oui, c'est bon. Can we get a group photo, please, for the panelists? Photographers, group photo. Thank you. Moving on to the next plenary session. From transitions to sustainable peace and development in the Sahel. As we are aware, several countries in the region are currently undergoing political transitions. It is therefore very essential for us, Your Excellencies, thank you. This next plenary session is titled From Transitions to Sustainable Peace and Development in the Sahel. It is very essential for all of us gathered here together to prioritize the imperative of sustainability. And how can transitions be designed and implemented to achieve sustainable peace and development rather than simply perpetuating cycles of conflict and instability? What roles can we play in supporting sustainable transitions and promoting a return to constitutional orders in several countries in the Sahelian region? And so this panel session will explore the diverse forms of political transitions we have in the Sahel, and it will also reflect on the conditions under which these political transitions can lay the groundwork for a return, like I said, to constitutional order and ultimately contribute to sustainable peace, inclusive governance, and long-term development. Photographers, please, can we settle down? To take us further and to explore these questions, we have as moderator this afternoon Dr. Jide Okeke, Director, UNDP Regional Program for Africa. Please help me welcome Jide to the podium. We also have as the lead speaker Mr. Yakub El-Hilo, Director, UNDCO Africa. Please, where is he? Oh, here. And our panelists, we have His Excellency, former Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, former President of the ECOWAS Commission, His Excellency Kadri Ouedraogo, and member of the West African Elders Forum. Please, a round of applause for him. We have Kulud Kairi, founder and director of Confluence Advisory Sudan. Where is she? Where is Kulud? Okay. We also have Yuri Traore, ISS Regional Director, Regional Office for West Africa and the Sahel. Please, a round of applause for them. Okay, over to you, Jide.
Thank you so much, my sister, and good afternoon again, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. You know, I came into this hall this afternoon, or in the morning, and I wasn't smiling, unlike our regional director yesterday, because I had gone for a 12 kilometers walk this morning from 5 o'clock. And I went with two colleagues. If you know Max, if you've seen Max around here, you know, and you've also understood who Zeno is, you know why I struggled. But I'm hoping that from this conversation today, we would have more smiles in our face, building on, Your Excellency, some of the inspiring words we've heard from the former president of Nigeria, as well as other esteemed senior officials that have spoken over the last couple of days. Let me say a few words in 1 minute, and I promise you in 30 minutes we'll be out of here. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think as we start this session on from transition to sustainable peace and development, let me share three brief observations. The first is that, as we have heard over the last 2 days, despite the global economic uncertainties, Africa's economies, including those in the Sahel, are resilient but not prosperous. And I think the Director General of the African Development Bank gave us some data, so I wouldn't go into that. 3.6% performance growth in 2025, and it could increase to 4.3% in 2026. So we are resilient as a continent. The second point, which I want to raise, is that political transitions, which we are going to be discussing today, which in many ways is both a process and an outcome of governance. So the quality of political transitions is both a process and an outcome of governance, has remained ambivalent on the African continent. And so we can look around the continent, and what we will find are not just electoral transitions, but we would also find military transitions, authoritarian transitions, and I can go on and on. So the fundamental question to ask ourselves as we think about complex political transition is how can transitions, political transitions, how can they enable, facilitate, consolidate, and accelerate sustainable development and peace? That is going to be the focus of our conversation today. And to help us frame this question, it gives me an honor to invite my big brother and very seasoned diplomat from Sudan, Mr. Yakub El Ilio, to help us frame this conversation. A round of applause to him.
Thank you, my young brother, Dr. Jide. I hope you can hear me. When I was invited to be part of this panel, and Prime Minister, it's an honor to be sitting next to you. My question was, I hope it is not all men. And the answer was absolutely not. It is not. And then I asked the second question, so if it is not all men, who is there? And I was assured that there was at least one, if not two, females on the panel. And then I said, who are they? So I came to know that one of the two females is also a Sudanese, Khulud. I said, that's too many Sudanese. So it's an honor, really, to be on this panel, and I stand on all existing protocols. Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellency, Prime Minister, Your Excellency, former Head of State, allow me to stand on existing protocol. And we're talking about the Sahel, and I am here accompanied by many senior colleagues from the United Nations system who spend their day and night agitating and trying to get the Sahel right by understanding the pulse of the place, by understanding what people want, especially the young Sahelians. And in that quest, we travel a lot around the region. We sit and listen and try to learn, and we try to mold or forge a strategy that is speaking to the pulse of the place. And among many of those senior colleagues, some are sitting in front of me. Ahuna is right here. Mar he has just stepped back. SRSG Shimao is here. SRSG Abari is here. Former SRSG An-Nadif is here. We spend a lot of time trying to understand. And as we go around and we listen, we also come to realize that people are tired of broken promises. They are not just asking for elections. They are asking for dignity, for agency, for leadership that works for them. Young people, many of them educated, connected, and disillusioned, tell us they are tired of being spectators on their own future. They want to be more in the driver's seat. Transition leaders, some controversial, some deeply popular, speak of burning desires to correct historic injustices, to reclaim sovereignty and to deliver results where previous regimes have failed. This brings me to trying to keep with the tradition that we have seen here very much alive since yesterday morning, this tradition of being provocative, of being candid and speaking about things as they are without any sweeteners. Today's conversation is urgent as it is uncomfortable, because the Sahel is going through a moment of major redefinitions, if not a moment of defiance. And because of this, we are seeing a wave of political transitions. Some call them coup d'etats, others call them ruptures. Some of these ruptures are abrupt, some are negotiated, some welcomed by the public, others contested. But what binds them all is the fundamental reality. Transitions are not the problem. What led to them is the problem. So I continue to be provocative. Should we stop seeing transitions only as deviations and start seeing them as a system's cry for reinvention? What do we really mean by democracy in the Sahel today? Is democracy simply the holding of elections every 5 years or 4, regardless of whether these elections truly reflect the will and voice of the people? Or is democracy a living system built on trust? We see the slogan of our conversation. Built on trust, participation, and accountability, one that people must see and feel in their daily lives. Because if it is the latter, then we must admit something broke down well before the first soldier marched to the presidential palace. Across the Sahel, people have risen not just against individuals or regimes, but against systems that no longer deliver, systems that promised representation but often delivered exclusion, that promised progress but allowed corruption, insecurity, and poverty to flourish. So, when we speak of transitions, we must ask, are we managing a regime transition, or are we enabling a people's transition? The difference matters. Regime transitions change faces at the top. People's transition change how power is exercised and for whom. In countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and I can go on, including my own country, Sudan, these questions are not abstract. They are real. They are existential, and they are deeply political. And yet, amid the complexity, we often see a rush for closure, a rush to return to constitutional rule, a rush to tick the box of elections, What kind of constitutional order are we rushing back to? Is it one that the people trust? Or is it one that includes rural voices, voices of the youth, voices of the women, of civil society, or one that just restores business as usual? Let's not forget, some of the loudest critics of unconstitutional change are the same who quietly undermine constitutions to cling to power. They stretch term limits. They silence dissent. They manipulate institutions, hollowing out the very framework meant to uphold democratic order. So this is not models and timelines don't always fit local contexts. Dear friends, in our conversations, many transitional leaders and their populations expressed a strong commitment to reform. But they also raise concerns that external actors too often prioritize quick returns to normality rather than supporting meaningful, lasting transformation. And that's where the issue of sovereignty becomes so central. Because for many in the Sahel, sovereignty is not just a legal concept. It is a demand for respect. Respect for the right to define people's own path, even when those paths challenge our familiar paradigms of diplomacy, of geopolitics, or democratic concepts. So with that, I have a few questions that hopefully GD and you are leading us will help shape the conversation. How do we stay the course when the path is uncertain? How do we balance principles with pragmatism, sovereignty with solidarity? How do we accompany transitions in a way that strengthens democracy but also reflects the people's demand for new governance models? What kind of democracy do the Sahelian people actually want? And how do we help all of us to deliver on that? How can ECOWAS and ECAS and all the other sub-regional bodies evolve their approach to transitions from imposing timelines to accompanying transformation? What would it take to put people, not people in power, to put people at the center of these transitions? And finally, how do we ensure that this moment of turbulence becomes a moment of true possibility?
Or more importantly, reminding us that transition must be people-centered. And based on the inspiration from what we heard today around the art of leadership, I would want to turn to His Excellency, the former Prime Minister of Burkina Faso. You've heard that framing. To what extent does it resonate with your time as Prime Minister from 1996 to 2000? What makes transition succeed? Why does transition fail? Based on your lived experience. Over to you.
Merci bien. Allô? Ok, merci bien. Je n'étais pas prévu pour faire partie de ce panel ce matin, mais les organisateurs m'ont demandé d'apporter plutôt un témoignage sur mon expérience sur les transitions dans les régions de l'Afrique de l'Ouest où j'ai eu la chance de participer à beaucoup d'entre elles. Je rappelle que j'ai été président de la commission de la CEDEAO de 2012 à 2016. Et c'était une période où, malheureusement, notre région a connu beaucoup de crises, soit des ruptures institutionnelles, certains diront coup d'État, soit des soulèvements populaires qui ont renversé un régime, et également des crises électorales. Alors c'est dans ce sens que je voudrais rapidement partager avec vous ce que j'ai vu des transitions et le rôle qu'a joué la CEDEAO dans ces différentes transitions. Je voudrais m'associer à l'introduction, à la brillante introduction de Yacoub pour dire qu'il a en réalité tout résumé. Et je suis totalement d'accord avec son intervention préliminaire. Mais avant d'aller plus loin, vous me permettrez de rendre un hommage mérité aux deux anciens chefs d'État que nous avons avec nous aujourd'hui pour le rôle qu'ils ont joué dans la remise de la démocratie sur les rails dans les pays où cette rupture a eu lieu et également dans les médiations en tout genre pour permettre à notre région d'être une région de paix, de stabilité et de progrès. Je voudrais faire référence à son Excellence Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, ancien président de la République fédérale du Nigeria, pour le rôle actif qu'il a joué et qu'il joue encore pour le maintien de la paix dans notre région. Je dois dire que lorsque j'ai rejoint la CEDEAO, il était à l'époque président en exercice de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de la CEDEAO. Et pour l'anecdote, c'est lui-même qui a signé la décision de nomination de la conférence des chefs d'État me faisant président de la commission de la CEDEAO. J'ai pu donc travailler étroitement avec lui et dans sa capacité de président en exercice. Et aujourd'hui, je continue également à collaborer avec lui dans le cadre du Forum des aînés de l'Afrique de l'Ouest pour apporter une contribution apaisante dans toutes les situations de crise où la démocratie et la paix sont en danger, pour faire de notre mieux pour que la paix règne à nouveau dans notre pays, dans notre région. Ensuite, le président Dioncounda Traoré, ici présent, a été un acteur clé dans la réussite de la transition au Mali. Le coup d'État au Mali a coïncidé avec ma prise de fonction et depuis cet instant du coup d'État jusqu'à la conclusion de la transition, j'ai eu la chance d'être avec les acteurs politiques maliens et la communauté internationale pour s'assurer que cette transition soit menée à bon terme et que la démocratie reprenne le cours de son histoire au Mali. Et je dois dire que le président Dioncounda Traoré a joué un rôle clé dans la réussite de cette transition. Je voudrais peut-être rappeler un peu les raisons pour lesquelles la CEDEAO s'est retrouvée dans ce processus de suivi des processus politiques ou des transitions en Afrique de l'Ouest. Lorsque le traité de 1975 était signé, la CEDEAO n'avait pas pour but de traiter des questions politiques. Si vous relisez le traité de 1975, c'était une organisation de coopération économique pour élever le niveau de vie des citoyens et apporter la prospérité et la paix dans notre région. Voilà ce que disait le traité. En cours de route, et nous avons travaillé très dur sur ces questions économiques, et je puis en dire quelque chose parce que j'étais à l'époque secrétaire exécutif adjoint chargé des questions économiques de la CEDEAO. Mais entre-temps, nous avons été confrontés à un problème, et ce problème date de la crise du Libéria, dans les années 90. Et à l'époque, comme je l'ai dit, j'étais secrétaire exécutif adjoint, et la question qui se posait, vu la crise au Libéria, était de savoir si nous pouvons raisonnablement parler d'intégration économique, de développement économique, dans un environnement où il n'y a pas la paix, il n'y a pas la stabilité, il y a même des risques d'atteinte à la vie humaine. Peut-on envisager l'économie sans le politique? Je crois que des intervenants ont relevé ceci, que c'est le politique finalement qui doit permettre à l'économique d'évoluer. Et c'est ce que nous avons constaté, parce que lorsqu'il y avait la crise au Libéria, qui éventuellement a contaminé également en Sierra Leone, le problème c'est de savoir qu'est-ce que pouvait faire la CEDEAO étant une organisation d'intégration économique. Mais les faits ont forcé la CEDEAO d'intervenir dans cette crise. Et je dois dire que c'est ici même à Banjul, j'étais à la conférence des chefs d'État de mai 1990, que les chefs d'État ont décidé d'intervenir au Libéria pour sauver des vies humaines, pour ramener et imposer la paix au Libéria. Et c'était dans cette même ville de Banjul, sous le leadership du président Daouda Diawara Kairaba, qui était à l'époque président de la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Il a été donc décidé que la CEDEAO enverrait des troupes au Libéria pour mettre fin au massacre et mettre fin à la guerre civile qui faisait ravage dans ce pays. Et à cette occasion, je voudrais encore rendre hommage à la République fédérale du Nigeria, car c'était ce pays qui a pris en charge sur lui d'envoyer les premières troupes, de prendre en charge le coût de cette intervention. Et c'est après que des pays comme le Ghana et d'autres pays de la CEDEAO l'ont rejoint en envoyant des troupes et en faisant en sorte que ces troupes soient financées jusqu'au rétablissement de la paix au Libéria. Tirant leçon de cette crise, la CEDEAO s'est dit, nous ne pouvons pas continuer de parler d'économie quand la maison brûle. Il faut que la CEDEAO n'ignore pas les questions politiques, parce que c'est les questions politiques qui vont permettre ou non à la CEDEAO de réussir sur le plan économique. C'est la raison pour laquelle la révision du traité de la CEDEAO a eu lieu en 1993, tirant leçon de cette crise du Libéria et de la Sierra Leone pour dire la CEDEAO ne peut pas ignorer les questions politiques, parce que sans les questions politiques, on ne peut pas avoir la stabilité et la paix nécessaires au développement. C'est la raison pour laquelle un comité d'éminentes personnes a été mis en place, présidé par le général Yakubu Gowon, ancien président de la République fédérale du Nigeria, qui, à la fin de ses travaux, a proposé aux chefs d'État et de gouvernement un traité révisé de la CEDEAO qui a été adopté en juillet 1993. Et ce traité révisé prévoyait que la CEDEAO devrait s'occuper également des questions politiques, de la paix et de la sécurité et promouvoir la paix dans la zone de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est ainsi qu'un troisième poste de secrétaire exécutif adjoint a été créé qui devait s'occuper des questions de sécurité, de paix et des questions politiques. Voilà comment la CEDEAO a été donc remaniée pour prendre en compte l'agenda politique, parce que sans la paix et la stabilité, il n'y a pas d'économie. Et la CEDEAO a cheminé dans ce sens jusqu'à sa transformation en commission, mais les questions de paix, des questions de sécurité et les questions politiques sont désormais incorporées dans le mandat de la CEDEAO. C'est la raison pour laquelle la CEDEAO a adopté en 1991 d'abord la déclaration de principes politiques, parce qu'il fallait que les États s'entendent sur la voie qu'ils entendaient prendre en matière de gouvernance. C'est là, cette déclaration de principes politiques de 1991 a décidé que désormais les régimes de la CEDEAO seraient régis par les régimes démocratiques, que la CEDEAO ne devrait plus accepter des accessions au pouvoir par des voies non constitutionnels. Et que lorsqu'une telle situation survenait, il fallait que la CEDEAO fasse quelque chose pour remettre la démocratie sur les rails en aidant le pays concerné à retrouver la paix et la concorde. Alors, je me résumerai à citer juste 3 exemples pour vous donner une idée de comment les transitions ont été gérées jusqu'à présent par la CEDEAO. Et le premier exemple que je vais prendre, c'est l'exemple du Mali. Comme je le citais, c'est en 2012 qu'il y a eu le coup d'État militaire. Et la CEDEAO a décidé de soutenir le pays pour que le retour à la démocratie ait lieu. Et il y a eu beaucoup de missions dont j'ai eu l'honneur de faire partie, qui sont parties discuter avec toutes les autorités et les parties prenantes au Mali pour organiser la transition. Le fil étant que la démocratie devrait être préservée et le conseil qui était donné, c'est de préserver la Constitution. Il y a une rupture de la Constitution. Les chefs d'État et de gouvernement ont estimé qu'on devait travailler à revenir dans le fil de la démocratie et à rétablir la Constitution du Mali et que tout le monde respecte cette Constitution. Mais la Constitution disait que dans le cas de vacances du chef de l'État, c'était le président du Parlement qui devait assurer l'intérim jusqu'à l'organisation d'autres élections. Et c'est dans ce sens que son Excellence Diankounda Traoré, en sa qualité de président du Parlement, a été donc choisi pour conduire cette transition en restant dans le respect de la Constitution qui prévoyait ces dispositions. Et c'est avec lui que les institutions de la CEDEAO, l'Union africaine, les Nations unies et tous les autres acteurs politiques du Mali se sont assis autour d'une même table. Et à l'époque, créé ce qu'on appelle... Donc les changements étaient... OK.
Thank
Donc,
you so much.
voilà, je voulais continuer sur d'autres, mais on peut revenir si vous voulez.
Applause, please. Thank you. It's hard to summarize, Your Excellency, what you said, but I think if there's one recommendation coming out of that, it's the idea of transitions, change makers at multiple levels, not just in terms of national leadership, but in terms of effective regional institutions, and in this case, ECOWAS. But one thing you said, Your Excellency, which resonated, is the necessity for the pursuit of economic governance. I think one aspect which has been missing in the conversation is the role of civil society and how civil society can serve as a catalyst for effective political transitions. Khulud has been championing that in Sudan. And so, Khulud, from your perspective, what do you see as the most important recommendation coming out of the role of civil society in advancing transitions based on the success stories and some challenges that we have seen on the African continent so far? Over to you.
Thank you, Jide. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay. Thank you, Jide. And good afternoon, everyone. I want to highlight just a few things, well, 3 things really, before I get to Jide's question, because it's something that has been, the civil society across the continent has been wrestling with for some time. And for me, looking not just at Sudan, but also at other post-coup contexts within the continent, and often when there is a governance vacuum, there are 3 sort of realities that I think we have to, and oftentimes it's seen as something that only takes place at the national level, or that only has meaning at the national level. But I think we need to vastly and very quickly look at this from a very different perspective, and probably closer to what people in the local level and everyday people see it as. Secondly, it's that, and just to pick up on what Dr. Yaqub said earlier, this idea of sovereignty again needs to be reassessed. I believe personally that people are sovereign and states much later. Unless we take in people's sovereignty as the primary locus of our definition of sovereignty, we're immediately going to be faced with the, people in uniform asserting whatever they think their sovereignty is. I think people are sovereign. People have been the ones who decide what their futures look like forever. And it's, these nation states that have come about only in the past, century and a half, have been superimposed on top of that people's sovereignty. And oftentimes they sort of erase people's sovereignty. And that hasn't worked out very well for us. And the third thing is, and related to that, is that people in Africa are actually very good at governing themselves. It's not often something we talk about when we put the state at the center of our conversations. But in Sudan, for example, we had periods of time where we had what might be called a governance vacuum, and people actually govern themselves reasonably well, oftentimes because they didn't really have any access to the state before, and so the loss of a state, the loss of a government, was not as much of a big deal. It was not so much of a vacuum to their lives. And we need to contend with that. What do formal structures mean then in the context where people are able to govern themselves? How can we get formal structures not to compete with this local governance, but also to complement it, or rather to complement it? And the third thing is that, and this is going to sound very provocative, and I apologize to Jide because he asked me not to be provocative, but I think he should know better by now, is that Africa is eating its young. Yesterday we heard from several people on these panels that they don't feel represented by their leaders at any level, and that they don't believe that they have necessarily the kind of futures that they had envisaged or even that had been envisaged for them. And we really need to very quickly think about what this means. And when we think about young people in Africa, we really are talking about the majority. We're not talking about young people as their own standalone minority or niche group with very specific different needs. We're talking about the majority of Africans, particularly here in the Sahel. And so when we think about youth empowerment, youth employment, what we really mean is systemic changes that actually cater to the majority of people, not some niche group. And I'm very grateful that Sudan has been included in the Sahel. I don't think 2 people from Sudan is too many. Dr. Yaqub, I actually think there aren't enough of us here. And oftentimes we have these very colonial ideas of what the Sahel means. It's francophone and it stops at, the Chad-Sudan border, which doesn't make any sense. We've seen the political dynamics, we've seen the climate shocks, we've seen the sort of terrorism activity that is plaguing parts of the Sahel also, meander into Sudan and has done historically. So why this very arbitrary separation? And, following on from that, just to answer Jide's question, when we think about civil society engagement, if we understand what I've just highlighted just now to be true, then we can't think of civil society as this nice add-on. It has to be central to the conversations that we're having, particularly post-coup. Because if people are sovereign, and if democracy is an everyday practice, and if people actually are pretty good at governing themselves, then how do we complement that rather than try to reinforce a status quo ante? How do we complement that in terms of looking at actually what could work, what's already working, rather than trying to enforce these state-based processes in order to bring some kind of constitutional order back, or in order to re-engage economically? Economic production happens at the local level. The vast amount of economic transaction happen at the local level. Why aren't we engaging with them there? There's something that many of us, I'm sure, are familiar with, but that I want to foreground here, which is this idea of civic wealth, which is that wealth is generated at the civic level, at the local level first, just as peace and security is, just as stability is. And unless we sort of reorganize and reorient our ideas about where these things, stability, commerce, wealth, emanate from, we're forever going to be stuck in this disconnect between what happens at the national level and what really happens at the local level. So I can rattle off a few things, how to encourage economic growth, particularly by looking at civil society. You need to have civil society representation and voice, and by doing something that most governments frankly don't want to do, which is increase the capacity and capability of civil society to lobby them, to share their voice with civil society, to share policy-making spaces with civil society, to promote local actors, which means actually focusing on and privileging and promoting local knowledge and expertise, perhaps over some of the other types of expertise that we've seen, to value the grassroots rather than see it as a tick box exercise. We've got to talk to the people at the grassroots. That's everyone. To make sure that we look after communities, because communities look after themselves. And of course the idea that you have to have equitable and sustainable growth. On the panel before, one of the ladies at the back there spoke about how even if you have a civil society, private sector and government partnership, what you often have is actually there's no guarantee of equal production, or no guarantee of equal distribution, even if you have civil society representation. So actually we need to look beyond some of these, quite nice to have jingoistic terms and really think about what does it mean to have the right people in the room? What does it mean? Who are the right people? How do we decide that? Who puts service ahead of self-interest, both at the local level and at the national level? And unless we contend with these ideas, unless they inform the framework within which we look at post-coup countries, we're never going to get to a situation where coups don't become the only way of changing government. And so if we're going to instill democratic practices, we actually have to make sure we're working with the right people that ensure that those democratic practices take place, that trust and believe in them, a key issue here being trust, and that actually want to make sure that these processes work. President Goodluck Jonathan earlier said that we need to have the kind of thinking that looks at the interests of our grandchildren, and that kind of thinking is completely gone. I mean, how many people here can honestly say they come from countries where the interests of even the next generation, let alone the one after that, are being met right now? So I think there's a lot of rethinking that needs to happen. Those are just some ideas. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you so much, Khulud. We are running out of time, so let me ask the last question to my dear sister Uri. You've heard from the UN, you've heard from former senior officials within government, and you've heard from civil society. From where you sit as a researcher, at the head of one of the leading research institutions on the African continent, what would be your recommendation around how we manage?
ISS have produced this report, which is rethinking responses to unconstitutional changes of government in West Africa. This was published in June 2024. And the recommendation of that report was relevant and is still relevant today. So that means if you look at transition, much is not changing because we keep going to the same recurring issues. The issue of governance that everybody agree here, the issue of leadership. And then you look at it and we see this deficit of trust between the leaders and the communities, and deficit in providing social services, deficit to even, how you call it, of, accountability and so on. So if we want to address the issue, we have identified already what are the problems. We should get to that foundation because we know the core issue. So most of the time, what are we doing? We are addressing the symptom, and we think that we need one or two events. We have a whole list of how transition should be, done. And if it doesn't go that way, then we don't know what is the plan B. Because we have a very, some kind of blueprint how transitions should go. But we forget that the landscape has changed, that the expectation of our youth is different because of social media and all this technology going on. So they know what they want from their government. And they want changes. And their trust has been broken so many times. And this is not about civilian who is in power, civilian or military. The bottom line is military did not, they did not provide as the civilian have failed also. So the issue again is about leadership. How do we change fundamentally all these core issues that are here? And even the institutions which are supposed to provide solutions, we see that there are issues inside those institutions. Yesterday, I was sitting here, and we look at the stage, and we are talking about integration, inclusion of women, and inclusion of youth. But the podium, how many women were here? How many youth were represented? But we are preaching. We continue to do this tokenism and to talk about, thank you, to talk about those issues. So we need to look at fundamentally, honestly, because we spend a lot of resources. This space is important for us to come and talk. But the people who are left behind, our researchers are on the ground. And women are struggling with, terrorism issues. They cannot go out to get food for their children and so on. Young girls are being trafficked when they are promised to have jobs and they find themselves in prostitution, in the mine, and so on. So our population are struggling, and they want to see the dividend of, the changes and so on. But the social contract is broken. And so there are certain steps we need to take. We need to depoliticize the security forces so that, they are professionalized and they are Republican, military or security sector, and they focus on their core issue on providing security for the population, and then, fighting for, fighting terrorism and so on. We need to depoliticize and then have security sector reform. It's being done, but again, why do we keep having the same recurring issues? Something is failing. Another thing is our population struggling. Again, most of the services we are not able to provide, healthcare, education for the population, potable water, agriculture, and so on. As long as we don't provide that one, whoever is in power, what took the people in the street, they will go back again. Because when they don't see the peace dividend, they will go back again. So the bottom line is, again, I was so happy when I heard some of our speakers talking about leadership. And I always say that we keep talking about President Goodluck, President Traoré from Mali. And we have so many leaders in Africa. I refuse for anybody to tell me that Africa did not produce the most consequential leaders on this earth. We have leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara. We have leaders, all the forefathers who came, Modibo Keita and so on. They were not perfect, but they have left solid legacy for us to build on. At the same time, Africa did not produce all those dictators and criminals who did World War II, World War I, and God knows what. They were not Africans. So we have so much to build on. We have the resources and we have the resilience because we've been going through so many things with external actors and so on. Why is it that still we are sitting here?
Very, very profound. No, thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would not even attempt to summarize what has been said, but the masterclass that was provided by Yakub on transitions will certainly be shared to all of us. I think it's important, will certainly be shared to all of us. I think it's important, and some of the recommendations will be captured by the rapporteurs as well. But let's transformation. On that note, thank you so much, Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, for listening, and to our panelists as well. A round of applause to all of them. Thank you, and I think it's lunchtime.